because people are human. Throughout the history of humanity, whenever groups of people get together, they've established rules of how they're expected to cooperate in order to achieve whatever their common goal is. But it does give the potential client additional assurance that they would not have if they were negotiating with someone who is not a member of ATA and who is not bound by a code of behavior. There really should be a general atmosphere of collegiality and cooperation among the members so that we can all cooperate in order to advance the profession.
Welcome to the ATA Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Baird, and you're listening to Episode 12. Each month on the podcast, we bring you news and insights from the American Translators Association. Today, we're going to talk about the ATA Code of Ethics and Professional Practice. Joining me today is Ted Wozniak. Ted is the current ATA Treasurer and a past ATA Director, or board member. He is also chair of the ATA Ethics Committee. Ted is a German to English freelance translator based in New Orleans, and he specializes in financial translations. Ted, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Matt.
We're talking about ethics today, of course, and my first question to you right off the bat is, why is ethics important? And more specifically, why is it important for ATA to have a code of ethics and professional practice?
Well, that's an excellent question, Matt. First, I think we need to define what ethics and a code of ethics are. Ethics are moral principles that govern a person's behavior or the conduct of an activity. Because people are human, throughout the history of humanity, whenever groups of people get together, they've established rules of how they're expected to cooperate in order to achieve whatever their common goal is and how they're supposed to interact. And whether those rules are unwritten social mores or written laws, they're intended to set out these norms of behavior. In terms of a professional association such as ATA, an ethics code serves two purposes to my mind. One is directed internally, that is to the members themselves, and it sets standards on how members are expected to interact with one another. For example, there's a tenet that says called acting collegiality, collegially, in our actions with other members. And the intent of those is, we have a common set of goals as members of ATA. And in order to achieve those goals, we need a positive, cooperative attitude amongst ourselves. I think the more important aspect, though, is that the part that's directed to the external, and that is our clients. When a potential client is negotiating with an ATA member on providing interpreting or translating services, knowing that that member is an that person is an ATA member who is bound by a code of ethics, gives that client some additional assurance that that person is competent to do what they say they can do because they've represented their qualifications honestly, and that they're going to do what they promised to do. So obviously that's not a guarantee of what the client's going to get, but it does give the potential client additional assurance that they would not have if they were negotiating with someone who is not a member of ATA and who is not bound by a code of behavior.
Okay. Now, the current code was approved by the ATA board in October 2010. You joined the board as a director a month later, but perhaps you can tell us why ATA reviewed its code of ethics at the time and decided to update it. Do ethics requirements change over time?
Well, as you said, I joined the board in 2010. I was not involved before that in the revision of the code. So I cannot speak directly to what motivated that revision and change. But having looked at the previous code and actually having had to abide by it as a member, there is a slight difference in the direction. The previous code was basically split into two parts, directed at two different camps, if you will. One was the freelance individual members of the ATA, and the second half was obviously directed at corporate members, the translation companies and agencies. Interestingly enough, some of the unique issues that interpreters face were not addressed at all in that code. So my supposition is that when they decided to revise the code, is that there was a decision made to try to find one unifying code that would apply to all types of ATA members, individual translators who are freelancers, corporate members, as well as interpreters. There are positive and negative aspects to that approach in writing a code. From a more general standpoint, and to answer your second question about reviewing and changing a code, any code has to be reviewed from time to time to see if changes in society, technology, the profession are still being addressed. We all know that there have been changes in technology and communication that have altered not only how we conduct business, but they've changed society as a whole. So over time, these codes really should be reviewed to see if they're still achieving the objectives for which they were written. I would mention here, it's a good point, I think, that the Ethics Committee is actually currently reviewing the code as it is now. So it's already been 7 years, and we are looking at the current code to see if it needs to be revised, as well as the commentary, particularly based on our experiences as a committee dealing with actual ethics cases over the last few years.
Now, you just mentioned a commentary. The ATA published a commentary to complement the code, and you actually co-authored that with ATA President David Rumsey. Maybe you can elaborate a little more on why that was necessary.
Be glad to. When we revisited the code and we wrote the commentary, because our code was so broadly written, that we decided that it was necessary to have a commentary that explains and illustrates the code, primarily for the Ethics Committee itself, for the members of the Ethics Committee, that when they get a specific case, they would have some guidance in how to apply the code to that specific case. It's very similar to, I can make the analogy between a piece of legislation and case law in the American system or the Anglo-American system. Judges have to interpret or determine how a specific law should be applied in a specific set of circumstances in a case before them. So in the same manner, the commentary is intended to assist members of the Ethics Committee and how they have this very broad tenet, and how do we interpret that, how do we apply that in a very specific case on a case-by-case basis. And as such, the commentary is intended to be a living document that's going to change over time as the Ethics Committee gains experience in different things. And again, as I mentioned, that's also part of our revision project, is to put some more items in the commentary based on the cases that we've had to handle over the last few years.
All right, so basically it not only helps members understand the code, and because it's in such broad terms, but it also helps the committee then apply it when a violation has occurred.
When a violation is alleged to have occurred.
Thank you very much. The legal language is important here. There are 8 tenets or principles in the current code. What are some of the ethical requirements covered under these 8 tenets?
Well, yeah, speaking very broadly, the first tenet deals with faithful rendering of the text, or you might say linguistic integrity, and remaining impartial as part of that assignment. It means, when you're doing a text, you don't get to add your personal spin to things or put your value judgments on it. You cannot be an advocate or a protagonist. You have to be impartial in either in your interpreting duties or in rendering the text. You have to take the author's tone and point of view and render that into your target language. The second tenet deals with confidentiality, which is obviously, we tell a lot of these, we just take it for granted many times, but obviously if, we deal with a lot of personal information, we deal with business secrets, and possibly even intelligence secrets, real secrets. And obviously you have to keep these things confidential. Your clients have to be able to trust you that you're not going to breach their confidentiality. The third tenet basically deals with your capabilities in representing your qualifications honestly. So, I mean, that's just basically, an ATA member cannot or should not accept an assignment that they know they're not qualified to do. They can't claim credentials that they don't have or other qualifications. The fourth tenet basically deals with continuing education. And I mean, again, as a group of professionals, with the association expects us to continue our education for our whole careers. Again, it sounds like it should be a given, but I think we all know, the association has placed such a high value on that in order, again, as a mark of professionalism, that they've decided to include that in the code. And I don't think there's a translator interpreter out there that's been in the business for 10 years that says that, because they have done professional development, that they're not a better interpreter and translator than they were in their first couple of years. It's absolutely necessary. The fifth tenet was collegiality, as I've mentioned before. So we'll try to, and it sort of ties in with the actual last tenet. So I'll skip to that one as well. So act collegially in our interactions with ourselves, and if we do have a dispute, try to work things out without getting nasty. The sixth tenet is, you could call it the contractual tenet. Basically, agree up front on what's expected of each party, and then do it. Live up to your promise. So do what you contract to do. Tenet 7 is actually, if you look at the commentary, this is really aimed more for literary translators, in that particularly for literary translators, it's called getting due recognition. So a literary translator should have their name on the translated work, and they should be entitled to royalties. Again, all these tenets are written very broadly, and we do rely on the commentary to figure out how does this apply to this one or that one.
Which of those principles in today's code weren't there in the previous code?
Actually, the only one that wasn't there, they were all there in a slightly different form. As I said, it was kind of broken out on the two target groups, but they were all there except for the collegiality tenet.
It's an interesting tenet. It's call it a nice tenet, so to speak. And sharing information, helping each other out. I've had that experience. But I'm going to play devil's advocate here. Some might say, wait a minute, sharing? I mean, I'm a business here. I'm a freelance translator. I'm a business. It's a dog eat dog world out there. Why should I share anything? Why should I share my secrets?
That's an excellent point, because that's certainly one way you could interpret that tenet. I would say that's not the intent. Obviously, we're not asking you to disclose business secrets or your proprietary ways of doing business. It really should be interpreted in a far more broad manner. Okay. As an association of professionals, one of our common goals is to promote and advance the profession. And that can't be done if the association is driven by infighting and different groups of rivals battling each other. Now, that is not to say that there can't be disagreements and differences of opinion. We certainly have lots of those in ATA. We have them on the board. So, but that's just the nature of when you get more than three people together, you're going to have a difference of opinion.
Well, that's healthy as well, right?
Sure. But as an overall nice to have thing, there really should be a general atmosphere of collegiality and cooperation among the members, so that we can all cooperate in order to advance the profession.
Okay.
I think I'd also like to add that my personal experience, having come from other professions before I became a translator, used to be an accountant, and I was in the stockbroker's business. Anyway, those other professions are far more competitive than what I found among translators and interpreters. As a general rule, translators and interpreters are far more cooperative and collegial than what I had experienced in my other professional careers. So, maybe because market conditions and specialization, maybe it's just because of the type of people who become translators and interpreters, or some combination of those. There's lots of work. I mean, we compete, but we don't really compete.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe that makes us a little more inclined to cooperate. But I was really shocked when I started as a freelancer on how cooperative my so-called competitors were and how willing they were to help me succeed. Trust me, it's not the norm.
That's good to know. That makes me feel good about the industry and the profession that I'm working in.
It does. You chose to go. And that might, again, I'll say that might have something to do with just the type of people who decide to come into this. While we're on the topic, we're, as part of our review of the code and the commentary, there has been some discussion about tenets like that one, the collegiality one, the continuing education one, that whether or not it would be better or in order to separate those types of tenets out, the ones that I call really, these are good to do things,
Mm-hmm.
into that they're more aspirational, into a statement of best practices.
Okay.
So those would be things like, you really should do this, but if you don't, we're not going to punish you. So then we'd have the actual code of, like, more of a code of conduct. So, you breach confidentiality, you don't abide by the contract. There's going to be there could be punishment for that. You can be sanctioned. And then there'll be this other list of things like, because again, my personal thinking, when I was looking at this initially, the review, I was looking at the continuing education. And so, you can see, technically, if you never come to an ATA conference, is that an ethics violation? Because you're not doing professional development, and should we throw you out?
It's a good question.
So again, that's under discussion, and we'll see what the committee feels.
You mentioned the commentary was a living document, and that ethics codes need to be revisited. So you can almost call it a sort of a living document that needs to be constantly revisited and refined based on experience and feedback and things of that nature, correct?
Absolutely right.
Next question. Are all ATA members obligated to abide by the code?
Absolutely. No exceptions. On a general level, anyone who joins any association, by the mere act of joining that association, you agree de facto to abide by the rules and procedures that have been laid out for that association.
Okay.
At ATA, on the application form and on the renewal form, there is a statement that you're expected to read, because you're signing that you've read the form,
Yes.
that says, I am aware of the code of ethics and professional practice, and I agree to abide by the terms. So, for ATA members who are certified, there's also an additional requirement. They generally do it on the first, after 3 years, you have to turn in your CE points, and I hate to call it recertify, because it's not it, but
yeah,
you have to turn in your CE points. And one of the requirements is that you either attend, there's an ethics training session at every ATA annual conference, and there's an online offering for the same thing for folks that can't make it to the conference. So that's another requirement for that subgroup of members. But again, yes, every single member, it doesn't matter whether you're a corporate member, an institutional member, an individual member, a student member, every member of the ATA must abide or agrees to and is expected to adhere to the code.
Say I feel like I've witnessed an alleged code violation. What do I do? Better said, what's the procedure, I guess, for notifying ATA of a potential ethics violation?
Well, of course, we want you to report it. And we've tried to make that as easy as possible. There's a certain amount of bureaucracy involved simply because it's a semi-legal procedure. But there is an ethics complaint form that you can get at the ATA website. You can just search in the search bar. You can just put in ethics complaint, and you'll find the form. It's there in a Word file format and a PDF format. I'll tell you from an administrative point of view, we really like getting the Word file because everything's typed out. It's not handwritten, and we can read it all. Okay. So please do us a favor. You get that complaint form. You fill it out. It's pretty easy. There's some identifying information. Who are you? Who are you complaining about? How do we contact you? How do we contact them? What happened? What's the alleged violation? You can add separate pages if you need to and submit any supporting evidence, because obviously if you're going to allege a violation, we need some evidence to back it up. And then you send that, you just email it to ethics@atanet.org. And let me repeat that if anybody wants to write it down, but it's on the form, ethics@atanet.org. And the chair of the ethics committee gets that, and then we go to work.
All right. And I can let everybody know, we'll put a link to the ethics page in the show notes on the ATA podcast page, so that after listening, if you want any further information, any more details, you want to read the commentary, you want to take a look at the code, you can head right to it. Ted, what happens if a member is found in violation of the code?
Well, there are 4 possible sanctions that the ethics committee has been given the authority to impose, going in the order of severity from the least severe to the most severe. The first thing that we can do is we can suspend specific membership rights or privileges. For example, if a member was claiming things on their ATA profile, certifications or whatnot that they didn't have, we could suspend that person's public profile so that when a potential client, the public, comes to search for them in the online directory, they're not going to come up for 3 months. We always try to fit the quote-unquote punishment to the crime. We've never had one, but say something came up with somebody's behavior at the conference and a presentation. I can't even imagine what it may be, but let's say there was. And so we might say, well, you're banned from being a presenter at the conference for a year. So specific membership rights or privileges can be suspended temporarily. The next option, next one up, is to censure a member. That's basically a reprimand. That can be either written, it's always written, but it can be either public or private. Again, depending on the situation. If it's public, then it goes up on the sanctioned members' web page of the website, which I'll mention again. The next level is then we suspend membership for some period of time. That could be a month. It could be quite a long period. The longest suspension that the committee's ever put in so far is 10 years. And then the ultimate, that is not a short amount of time. And, after 10 years, I seriously doubt if that member will ever return. So it is de facto the highest, most severe censure we have available, which is expulsion from the association, which is a lifetime ban. We throw you out and you can never come back. But again, it is important to stress that we try very hard to, again, to put it in civilian terms, and I don't want to talk about crime and punishment, but it's easy terms to understand. We make the censure, or whatever the quote unquote punishment is, fit the wrongful behavior that we're trying to correct. Actually, what we force someone to do is intended to improve their behavior so that it comes up to code.
Yeah.
Well, it's not never punishment for punishment's sake.
We've come to the end of the podcast, Ted, but before we go, I wanted to give you the opportunity to leave the listeners with any final thoughts.
Thank you, Matt. I would like to stress that it's important that I think the membership needs to know that ATA does have a reinvigorated and active ethics committee. That was not always the case in the past, and the fact that the ATA is enforcing the code increases the professionalism of the association, both internally and externally, especially in the sense of giving potential clients additional confidence when negotiating with an ATA member, as I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast. So I actually see that, and I would hope that the members can view that as a member benefit. That maybe you may not think of having an active ethics committee as being a member benefit, but I do see it, and I hope our members can see it that way as well. And I want to thank you very much for inviting me to do this.
Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thanks so much for your time today.
If I may, can I throw in one more thing?
Sure.
Any of you listeners who are interested in joining the ethics committee, who would like to do some of this work, and please contact me. You can write me at the ethics email address, and but only volunteer if you're ready to work, because I will tell you, it is a significant amount of work. But we'd love to have you, and if you're interested, contact me and we'll put you to work.
Well, you heard it here. If you're interested in ethics and would like to give back to the association, then please contact Ted. Volunteering for ATA is a rewarding experience, and I, for one, encourage all members to get involved. Thanks again, Ted. Really appreciate your time today and everything you do for ATA.
Thank you, Matt.
Well, that wraps up episode 12. To find the ATA Code of Ethics and Professional Practice, the commentary, and more, go to atanet.org and click on Ethics in the drop-down menu under About Us. Previous episodes of the ATA podcast are found under Resources, and you can subscribe to us on iTunes, Google Play, and TuneIn, and never miss a new episode. And if you like what you heard today, please leave a review and help spread the word on social media. And don't forget to connect with ATA on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. As always, I'd love to hear from you. Send your comments and suggestions to podcast@atanet.org. Who knows, your idea just might be the next ATA podcast. Episode 12 was produced by myself with support from Mary David and Rashawn Pacarel from ATA headquarters. And of course, very special thanks to Ted for joining me today. Thanks again, everyone, for tuning in. We'll see you next month.